Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing all right. I am wondering if we're in a simulation at present.
Yes, flying through the galaxy, playing a game, all of it. Sort of, I quite like the simulation theory. I think it's a solid theory for why things happen. Makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
to me at times.
We're playing the fascist module at present.
Yeah, I am quite that. I've the last 10 years has sort of like brought me around to this idea that there are overlords going, I wonder what happens if we just do this. Let's throw in a crazy person to run the country. Not just your country, mine too. And then yeah. Anyway, we're going to move up. We are talking about Black Mirror. We're on to season 4. We're kicking off season 4, and we're going to be jumping aboard the USS Callister. Captain Robert Daly presides over his crew with wisdom and courage, but a new recruit will soon discover nothing on the spaceship is what it seems, which is such a no, doesn't tell you anything kind of blurb. So I apologize, but that's what it says on. I'm using IMDb. So anyway, let's start then. USS Callister, Julian. What are your thoughts on this episode? Early thoughts.
This is one of my favorite episodes. It definitely has plot holes. It definitely, I'm sure we'll get into it and tear it to pieces. But I remembered this as kind of my favorite episode of those that I had seen, which sort of include this and the next episode, and that's where I stopped in a watch with a friend of mine. And upon reviewing it, I was equally charmed by it, equally taken by it. But I have a lot of questions. There are definitely plot holes, and there are definitely a lot of themes that are brought up. What was your response?
It's 50-50 for me. There are some really cool, moments, and I think the level of production in this is fantastic. Like there's moments in this I was really wowed. But the other half is very much, as you said, not so much plot holes, but it's like, oh, we're getting another angry incel story of doing something. Okay, it's this. There's so many tropes in this series where it's just like technology and angry incel, and I think the problem is because it's because of that. It then makes me a little bit more frustrated and annoyed with the technology side, because then I'm just like, DNA doesn't. You can't pull that information from DNA. That's not how that works. And then you've got 7 people aboard that ship. Each one is an independent AI for all intents and purposes. That's a lot of computing power. But apparently it's perfectly acceptable on a locked-off system. So, yeah.
That is all quite true. The DNA thing is especially egregious, right?
Yeah.
But perhaps we could just establish that we find out over the course of the episode that Robert Daly, who is sort of the chief technical officer at the Callister company that is running this game that you sort of plug into. It's sort of a virtual reality game, very complex. Has been stealing his coworkers' DNA and creating a copy of them, complete with memories, of course, as sci-fi always does this.
Memories up to the point of wherever he took the DNA from, which, that really bothered me, to be honest. But yes.
Yeah. I kind of take it as sort of like a sci-fi trope that annoys me, and it could have been we often say it could like a line of dialogue would go miles just in terms of like, well, you work for the company, we have scans of your brains, like one shot, and a line of dialogue basically would explain that. But yeah, that is an especially stupid thing that we keep seeing in science fiction.
Yeah, that's not how cloning works. That's not how AI works. It's not how DNA works. Yes, so there is that. I agree. And then obviously they say there's this whole inner world. Now the game, there's a game called Eve, is it? There's like a space exploration kind of game. Something like that. Yeah, I mean there's a couple of them actually, and that's obviously, well, his game is called Infinity, isn't it? But like, I think it's a take on. I think there's a game called Eve, which is quite famous, which apparently is very, very good, and it's sort of like free roaming kind of space exploration. You can build yourself up, like you start, with a small ship, and you can trade and work your way up. So I kind of like all that stuff because it feels, like cool. He works for a tech company, that this is what their thing is. It's an online gaming platform that everyone plays on. That's how they make their money, because of all the small transactions, or those transactions people buy and stuff. And I can imagine, like, you would, as a chief technical officer, you would have a locked off version, your development area, where you're gonna your sandpit, as it were, that you can try out new things, try out new codes, try out new ideas and stuff before it goes out to production. So again, I'm comfortable with all that as the ideas. It's some of the characters that start to sort of like not irk me as well. I actually kind of like all the characters. What I was curious about, let me put it this way. Okay, so let me put it to you. So the Robert Daly is it's this thing of like the creepy nerd. That sort of, I was a bit like, oh, this feels a little. And I know we've said about this. We've mentioned about incels before, and I think it touches on this even in Black Mirror. I don't know. I don't know if it feels too sort of. Is it too broad brush? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of give it a little bit of a pass because, I mean, I don't know that it's really an incel guy. Like he seems kind of more of a stereotype to me of like a nerd personality. Like, obviously, and we should say he's played by Jesse Plemons, who played Todd in Breaking Bad, who has that kind of like creepy demeanor. You can see why he was cast for this.
Yeah.
And the CEO is Jimmy Simpson from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and first season of Westworld. And, so obviously the CEO is sort of the more gregarious player type, and Jesse Plemons is the, nerdy type who's super into Star Trek, Space Fleet here. They have like what looks like Mike Allred comics art, they everywhere to represent the comic books for Space Fleet. And so that's all fun. It's it's fun to sort of do that. I sort of see him more as the sort of nerdy type who's like a little more introverted, right?
Yeah.
Sort of shy with girls, that kind of thing, which is a stereotype, but I'm willing to kind of give it a bit of a pass because it works for me.
No, that's fine. I think the thing is, because it plays out this thing of like, there's the nerdy type. So let's be clear. There are two realities in this episode. There is let's call it, there's the Office, the Office reality, and then there is the Callister reality, which is the ship, the sort of the game Infinity. Within that, like I say, he's nerdy, he's introverted, he's a little awkward, and but he is clearly like the tech genius behind this kind of thing. Like he does the majority of the programming and runs the development team. But what's interesting is it's sort of, there is an introversion, but it clearly shows that like people are not mean to him. It's not that mean. They're just sort of dismissive of him a little bit. Like they do sort of take him for granted. So I'm not trying to justify. I'm not justifying his his power fantasy, because in the Callister, then this sort of drives him to have this power fantasy of basically being Captain Kirk. I mean, let's be clear, the USS Callister is clearly Star Trek. It's an old and it's original series Star Trek. Like this is, he has a Kirk fantasy, and there's all this thing about him being adored by his crew and all this other stuff, and it's a power fantasy. And at first, it feels like I thought, it plays like they could be like NPCs or. Do you know what I mean? The people around him are just there. He's like, okay, well, I've built this one to look like the staff, but it's an NPC. It just does a set number of things, or it reacts to things. And then you learn later on, there are actually versions, including consciousness, as a full replication of their office reality consciousness is brought into this game. And he has godlike powers to manipulate that reality and uses it to force them and coerce them into playing along with his fantasy.
Well, so let's back up and just say that, and I'll have some thoughts on this, but let's back up and just say that like it starts amazingly well, right? It starts with inside the game, although you don't know it at the time. It basically starts as like a mini Star Trek episode, as they destroy the bad guy's ship and let him get away. And then, they sort of sing for He's a Jolly Good Fellow, and he kisses both female crew. And it's not really until that end sort of celebration of him that you sort of think, okay, that's over the top.
Yeah.
Until then, it's just a fun sort of like mini Star Trek episode. Brilliant special effects. I mean, this looks
and the
great.
set design. The set design is ace.
Oh, it's amazing, and it looks like Star Trek, the Abrams movie. Like it's like just so well done. And let's also remember, like this came out as Discovery's first season is coming out. So like this is coming out after a drought of Star Trek stuff. Obviously, like Galaxy Quest, is probably the closest predecessor to this as a sort of parody of Star Trek. But and then obviously what is the one we both like that's Seth MacFarlane's
the Orville.
The Orville. Yeah, so the Orville is like around the same time. So this is kind of this like weird moment in 2017 where like so it's like Star Trek's back, baby. But I think that this one sticks with me. And so first of all, I'm a lifelong Star Trek fan. So just seeing this is just like, oh my God, I get, a whole nother take on Star Trek, from this sort of like deconstructive lens that I don't think Star Trek has really often been seen through, right? Star Trek hasn't had its sort of, Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, deconstruction. And Galaxy Quest is kind of like a loving parody. And I like it, but I'm sure we'll cover it someday. But this is sort of like an unprecedented deconstructive look at Star Trek with a really negative eye toward what's really going on, and I love that stuff. And so often we talk about these fantasies of these action movies and these sci-fi movies, and we talk about how they're sort of male fantasies and what they're playing to. And this just takes that and like lays it bare in a really brutal way.
No, I agree. It's funny to talk about because I agree. I do think I say everything in this. The one thing I also want to shout out is the entire cast of this episode are also great. This is one of the. There's been episodes where I'm hot on one person, cool on another, or like. But this is one where like across the board, I'm like everyone's really good in this, and like they're funny and when they need to be, but they also play the roles. Like everyone's really solid in this. One of the things that's really interesting, I for something else that we're doing, I recently read the Gene Roddenberry written novelization of Star Trek, the motion picture. And in that, like, there's an entire sort of bit at the beginning, like an entire chapter that precedes the film in which Roddenberry's trying to sort of unkirkify Kirk. There's a whole bit where he's like, oh yeah, well, there's a legend and then there's the real man. Like, there's this thing of like, he's been built up as this person, but by these legendary stories, but he's not that kind of person. and it's, I think, even in 1980, like whatever, like, well, sorry, 79. So even in those late 70s, I think Roddenberry was a bit like, okay, I get that we're like, we've gone a little far with Kirk and we need to pull him back. But this is going like, this is clearly looking at it, as you say, from that lens and going like, no, like, like we should go further because that's the satire. That's what this is all about. And it is done well. It's done incredibly well. And you say,
Well,
I think
and
it's, go on.
well, as you say, it plays into the sort of like Kirk, and sort of like, this is my ship. And we think about like how Roddenberry didn't want Shatner originally.
Mm-hmm.
The studio forced Shatner on Roddenberry after that first The Cage pilot because they wanted more punchy. They wanted the, charming leading man who could be on Gunsmoke or something. And so this really gets at that way that it's very common to Star Trek, where, it really is the captain's ship. He's the main character, really Spock and McCoy were accessories, and I mean, nobody really, I shouldn't say nobody, right? But I mean, nobody fantasizes about like, I'm going to be the ensign in engineering. Like everybody imagines they're going to be the captain, right? And have these wonderful adventures, where they're defying Starfleet orders and kind of doing what they want, and this sort of cowboy diplomacy of the original series. So, and I think this really just tears that apart.
Oh yeah, but it made me think when I was watching it, because obviously it is a game. It's a computer. I mean, obviously this is technology, so it's within a computer game. But one of the things this made me think about and made me wonder about was like LARPing, or like, there's live action role play games where, again, people, and I'm not trying to downplay anybody, but like they're playing a role, they're playing a fantasy role. Like, they're like, okay, we're going to play this game, and I'm going to be a barbarian or a wizard or a thief or what, the rogue. I don't really, I'm not a big Dungeons and Dragons guy or those things. I don't know, but I've seen these things, and it's very much about fulfilling that thing that you can't do in real life, which becomes that sort of fantasy. So it can be, productive, and it can be, because I think there's a transparency, at least when you're doing LARPing, like you're out in the open and you're like, yeah, we're doing it, and we're all involved and everybody's sort of consenting. And so there is that kind of fantasy where you're part of a group. Like you said, the thing about this one though is the isolation of it, isn't it? Like you've said, this is the captain's ship. It's not just the captain's ship in this one though, is it? Like the Callister, this is the captain's world, the captain's reality. And that, because if it was just sort of like, I'm going to play my version of the captain and we're going to go on space adventures and stuff, then I'd be like, yeah, fine. It's a kind of a dull episode because it's just the thing. But as you said, the darker side, it's the twist, as it turns out, is that he has this control over the reality. And that's where it starts to get like the dark. Because the first bits, you sort of think of him as sort of like, oh, he's fine. He's just, like you say, he's just playing out a fantasy, like, it's when you learn the control that it starts to become a lot creepy.
Well, I'll have some thoughts on this, but to catch viewers up to speed, the new woman who works at the Callister company, clearly is interested in him, if not sexually, at least in terms of his coding, right?
Oh, she respects him. She he's like, there's a bit of hero worship, I think, even. So
yeah, and the chief executive officer sort of swoops in and sort of cock blocks and tries to give her the show around the office and sort of puts Robert Daly down, and then he overhears a conversation between two coworkers, including Nanette, this new girl, a new woman, who then says, "Oh no," she sort of retreats and says, "Well, I don't like him that way. It's not that I fancy him." And instead of just saying, "Well," she's saying this to a coworker who clearly doesn't respect Daly. She's sort of maybe backpedaling. This doesn't, I should befriend her and be nice to her, and maybe it could turn into something. If not, that's okay. Instead, he seems as if, like, in that moment, he sort of gives up and is like, "Yeah, I'm adding her to the simulation." I have power. Here, I don't know what to do.
Well, I think you're right, because it is that moment. Because not only does she backpedal, the other co-worker sort of describes him in creepy ways too. She says, "Oh yeah, he's a bit starey." Like you'll catch him just staring at you, and it's well, it gives me the ick, is what she sort of says. So, which is again, you can sort of see that this Nanette, this new worker, she's trying to sort of ingratiate herself into the environment. It's clearly like, even if she's backpedaling, she may not really believe it. Like, she's actually just going to say, "Okay, well, I've got to get on with my co-workers," and common sense says, I'm more likely to be working with these people than the chief technical officer. I've got to get on. And I think that's again, that's a fair thing where you could have that assessment. One of the things I thought was interesting, like you say, it's that thing of retreating back to the virtual reality, to the game. And as you said, like, he could just be like, "Oh, well, at least I can try and, I'll try and talk to her tomorrow, or we'll see what happens." Like, again, not looking for advances, but like, at least I can be civil and courteous, and if she's interested in the code, then cool, she'll be good at a job, and we can talk about that, whatever. Like you say, it feels more than that. This is that thing of like fear of rejection, isn't it? That sort of like, and it's not said in the show. It's sort of, I suppose it's sort of implied, is that this isn't the first time he's probably tried to make an advance in the office, or at some of maybe at a Christmas party or something, and it's gone awry, or he's been humiliated in some way. And as you said, sort of like, so that defense, or that sort of like that instinct to retreat is much closer to, okay, well, so one fail is I'm off, rather than persistence. So again, it's everything so far is like, okay, it's not good, but like, he's not really hurting anybody in the real world. They all think he's a little creepy, but they also know he sort of he's good at his job. He just sits in his office and leaves everyone alone. Yeah, and then you see him take something from the bin. He takes a coffee cup from the bin, and swap. This is where it took me a moment to realize what was going on. He takes a swab from that, puts it into the machine,
a scanner,
a
scanner,
like a
3D printer.
Yeah, and then that converts that DNA information into a digital version of Nanette in a skimpy-ish sort of blue Callister uniform.
So I don't know if you're aware of this, Scott, but COVID is a myth put through by the One World Order government in order to control us, and also spit contains memories.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, okay. So yeah, I'm joking, but it is really stupid. But we've seen this a million times, right?
I've seen it before, and I've hated it before. But this is that thing, though, that like, and we've talked about this with a few of the things in Black Mirror, where I'm like, yes, but people, look, if this had happened in a blockbuster, right? If this, and I'm sure it probably has, if this happened in a Marvel film, right, or any other big sci-fi, if this happened in a Star Trek episode or a Star Trek film, and I get this is a satire, so I get that, people would be all over it. Oh, this is ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. It's so stupid. But because it's in Black Mirror, which people think, it's high satire and all this other stuff, like, it gets it doesn't even get mentioned. I couldn't find anyone's ever sort of said, "Oh, well, that's a bit silly." And yeah, it's a plot device, but it's a stupid plot device. Like, it's a lazy plot device to me. Like you said, there are much other ways where you can be like, you can find out that he takes, like, the office is laced with scanners, and you've had to do all this other stuff to join the company. Like,
You're okay. So you're 100% correct. Let's talk about your point there, which is, it's come up as we've discussed Black Mirror. One of the most difficult things with Black Mirror is dealing with its fandom and its reception.
Yeah.
And the fact that it is sort of seen as like such a smart show.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of episodes that are very smart and have, very cool ideas and, are exploring things. But even those episodes are commonly have really stupid, I shouldn't say filled with, but have really stupid, dumb stuff. And you can say, yeah, well, that's just a trope. It's interested in exploring other things. But as we both pointed out, this could be easily solved, right?
Yes.
This is just dumb. And so you're right. There's a double standard there. I mean, I will say that you say people would be up in arms about this. Well, people like you and me, right? I mean, I recently saw Oppenheimer, and leaving the theater, I heard people say, "Well, that sounds like that felt like reading a history book," and I mean, let's not forget, the average film goer, is not sort of, a smart critic in this way and wants some punchy, and they just think Marvel is Marvel movies are brilliant.
Yeah.
But
I'm not
you're
putting
right.
but I'm not putting us above this, because you and I both sort of like, and I will forever go back to the fact that you and I both love Howard the Duck. So like we both want that kind of stuff. It's just the fact that, like I say, when you're writing this and there are there's an easy alternative, it just sort of pops out as being more egregious, and that's what sort of bothers me when I'm like, you've come up with some great ideas, you've really thought through some of the other bits on this. Like, why is this still here?
Well, I think there's a lot that's not thought through here, but I agree with you, and I think that this is part of what's sort of frustrating about Black Mirror is that its pretension.
Yeah.
Like it knows it's smart, but it's not as smart as it thinks it is. And whereas there are annoying Marvel fanboys who will say, this deserved an Academy Award for, Black Panther or something, or worse, Captain Marvel, okay. Or anything else. I don't mean to focus on ones that aren't, white male led.
I was about to jump in there and be like, we've got to pick some more.
Yeah, I love Thor, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm not a big fan, but yeah, those are pretty egregious for the most part. But while there are people like that, it's the fact that the Black Mirror fans think this is so much smarter and think this is cutting satire, and you and I have both been tormented by these sort of reviews online about how insightful and cutting edge it is, and it's like, no, it's much more in line with the original Twilight Zone. It's good, it's got good ideas, it's exploring good stuff, but it also is filled with problems that usually actually mature creators acknowledge, mature critics acknowledge. There's this odd way in which Black Mirror fans don't acknowledge them.
Yeah, they're a modern fandom. That's why. Every modern fandom has that kind of thing. The thing is, what I will say is, and this is, I think, if I can leave that aside, because then you get onto the ship, and you are introduced to the crew, and instantly, she materializes, and then she sort of meets everybody else. And what you find is that all the people that are the crew are there, like they exist. So it's this, they exist as sentient, active entities within this game, even when he's not there. So this thing is running code all the time, which is massively power consuming, but fine.
Doesn't make sense.
No.
Right. I mean, when you pause the game, why doesn't it pause? Everyone?
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot, so they exist as these sentient entities, and then you find out that he has manipulated them, because she's like, well, no, I want to get, how do I get out? And there's this I like the conversation where they're like, no, you're you here, but there's another you. Like there's the you out there in the real world, and then there's this you. Like you don't exist beyond them. You might have those memories, but you don't exist beyond this framework. they give up all the bits and pieces, and they're basically sort of like, they've been crippled by being trapped on the bridge until he arrives. And again, this is where I'm, aside from the DNA thing, I get back into it because I'm like, this is cool. It works. I like this idea of, there was a film a couple of years ago with Ryan Reynolds, which I'm sure you have watched and loved, called Free Guy.
I saw it. Yeah, it's not bad.
It's all right, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's the idea again of like NPCs gaining a level of sentience, and this idea of them having their own life within the game. And I kind of like the idea. It's a fun idea to play with. As you say, it makes no real sense, but it's a fun idea to play with. But I do like this. Is obviously that more darker version where they're not. It's not Guy. It's not like a free guy. This is, no, we're trapped here. We have no sexual organs, so we can't do anything, and we can't really get drunk because we're not prone to. But we can keep drinking, but we can't get drunk. We're just here in this environment, and then we are at his whim when he sort of comes and joins the game. And that's I kind of like that, because then we get into this idea of the power dynamic of things, which is really the true message of the film, isn't it?
Well, and we do see Daly, sort of abuse Walton. He has the Darth Vader moment of sort of choking him physically in that case, in this case. And then also sort of removing the facial features of Nanette, and that's quite effective. And he says, you'll keep trying to breathe, even though you don't need to breathe. Your brain will still be panicked, right? Or your simulated brain. So that sort of thing is very good. So I'm going to now play. Now comes the point where I play devil's advocate. I would argue, Daly is not the bad guy. Daly does almost nothing wrong through this whole episode. He's painted as the bad guy when this is revealed. I think, in fact, he's not a bad guy at all. And what this episode elides is that with it DNA, right? Because that's biological, right? Now, look, he's stolen somebody's coffee cup. Big whoop, right? That's not illegal. It's trash, right? So, but because it's DNA, and because we're given these people's perspectives, right? We think of them as a copy of the real person that's trapped in the game. In fact, they're an algorithm on a computer, right? Yes. This is not the real person. This person's suffering is lines of code. Okay, this is similar to like if you have a replica AI that says like, "I'm upset, I'm trapped in your phone," and AI sometimes shoots this stuff out. What we think is, this is not sentience. Now it might be. There are theories of sentience in which the sentience is just an epiphenomenon of complex processing, but let's assume that this is just an algorithm running on a machine. They experience pain, and because it's shot like a human being, it's shot with actors, we identify with them. But in fact, nothing he's doing to them is wrong. This is just a simulation. Lines of code can't feel pain. When I play, two of my favorite games are, my favorite is Grand Theft Auto. I run around Grand Theft Auto, killing cops, killing prostitutes, running, I don't feel bad about that. And I've told you, like, we've talked about, like, I don't feel bad about Alexa. I'll say thank you sometimes, but I will, I don't. A switch flipped in my brain where I realized, no, I don't feel bad about this. This is a computer. This is not a human being.
Yeah.
And now it's curious, like I've played Red Dead Redemption and I'm like a huge moralist. So maybe it depends on like what game I'm playing, but this is the game that is daily unwinding. And let's go with the incel metaphor. If incels could go, if what they want is a male power fantasy, right? And they could go into a game where they, get to let off that steam, maybe they wouldn't go shoot up schools. Like nothing he's doing is actually wrong here.
Well, no. You are. This is the manipulation of the way the episode is presented, and you are 100% right. Because not only is this a a game, a simulation. It's a locked off simulation, so it's his own version. So he's not mixing this with the public version, right? So he's not out there haranguing other players or, looking for other people. But it is this idea that we have around AI. As you say, it's presented as they are real people. But we have this fixation with sentience. And that's why, because you have this is what it's interesting is, again, like, I know I'm not trying to look for the technicalities of how the code works, because there is a part of this. We talk about Walton, the CEO. There was a version of him who's played he's like a fawning, kind of sort of like science officer or whatever he is supposed to be in the game. But when Daly's not there and you get the backstory, you hear the story about how he, in the real world, they'd like bring their son to work day or whatever, and Walton brought his son in and had a lollipop or some sort of whatever, and he then used that to scan, and so once it's scanned, he can replicate endlessly, because it's just sort of the code is there, the matrix is there. But he scanned in Walton's son into the game, and then in order to break him, he made him watch as Daly sort of made Walton watch as he jetted him off into space. And there's two parts of this that sort of that kind of bothered me, because it's code, it's all been programmed. And he says, what the Walton character, have you ever seen what happens to a human body once it's jettisoned into space? I have. I'm thinking, no, you haven't, because it's not space. Right. Yeah. And then he starts to sort of show all these emotions about how grief-stricken he was. And I'm like, this is really complex stuff. Like, this is deep-seated emotions of grief and anger and how depression, and he's sort of dealing with all this. And I'm just like, wow, like, the coding for this must be immense. Like, and this is the problem I get, where I'm like, I keep going back to, like, they're presented as people, but they routinely remind you they're not, because obviously there's the receptionist is presented as blue. There's another one from HR who was annoyed him and got turned into like some space spider. And then there's the other.
That's so cool, by the way.
Yeah, that is a great idea.
Yeah.
And then the other person who's the villain with the gun, who's another one that bothered them, and all this other stuff. Like, and they've got no, he drops his trousers, and he's like Action Man. There's no bits there. And so you are constantly reminded that they are not human, but you are there still led to feel for them because they have sentience. So yeah, I don't know. I get mixed feelings about this, because I am constantly going like, yeah, he didn't actually, like you said, he didn't kill the son. Like, he took his lollipop. He didn't do anything. He is, but there is this thing of going, yeah, but he's mean and he's horrible to these characters, and you go, yeah, but he hasn't hurt, as you say, he hasn't hurt anybody. Like,
he's mean to lines of code, right?
Yeah.
Now you're right. It's complex lines of code, but still.
But like you're saying, but he's not like, there's no point to this where he kicks a cat, or he sort of like, or he even treats anybody in the real world. So yeah, there's no thing where it's like the real world Daily does something that you'd be like, oh, this is seeping out, like that anger or whatever is seeping out into the real world. Yeah, I don't know. So you have a very good point. The
meanest thing that he does in the real world is not tip a pizza delivery guy for a pizza that he didn't order. Yeah. I mean, that's the meanest thing he does. It's just say, put the door on, do not disturb. I mean, so you're sort of making my argument for me. So the airlock thing is, first of all, that's not really what happens to bodies, in space. Like, you could go through space for a period of seconds, half a minute to a minute or a few, and basically be okay. I mean, you'll have some stuff freezing, but I mean, it's not like we see in movies.
No.
So maybe that's part of the coding of the game. But also, like, here again, this is, as you say, like, it has it both ways, right? So, like, Walton is Jimmy Simpson, like, screams, and I think even if I were that character in the game, I know that I'm code. I know I'm watching a code simulation of my son be killed. Okay, it's disturbing to see that, but then again, you have to, your brain is going to want to cope with that trauma. And I think we just have to go along with the fact that, like, if it can scan DNA and have their memories and everything, it's running a complex emotional, reproduction of a brain. But if your brain is going to want to retreat into something to cope with that tragedy of seeing that, and the first thing it's going to go to is, that's not actually my son. That's a bunch of code that just got airlocked, which is in fact correct. There's no reason to be traumatized except the lingering humanity of, that's lingering in that code going, that looks like my son. But in fact, I know I'm code. I feel things. That's real to me, but I know I'm just lines of code, and that's not my son. And the second point is, it establishes by dialogue that he threatens to do this again and again. If we actually saw that, or we saw that he just said, like, well, let's say, he doesn't like Walton and just says, I'm going to delete you and start you over because I can, here's 3 duplicates of you. Watch me kill 2 of you. If we saw that, it might reinforce that, in fact, these people, quote unquote, are actually just like code, and we should not actually have any moral feeling for them. But we do.
Yeah, no, I agree, because it makes me wonder about something else. But because you've said about carry this forward, but I'll just to stick to this point first. You are right. I think that's the point. Is as we get to this, is the fact that they're not human. They even acknowledge it. Actually, the whole point of the end of the episode is them saying, "Well, I can't exist like this, so let's get deleted." And they're like, "Oh, suicide." And they're like, "Well, really? We just won't exist. The real us will carry on. Like we are trapped within this thing. It's like there's no point carrying on." So even they acknowledge it's not really death at the end. When they're intending to commit suicide. But the other thing is, even let's just sort of take this from a business perspective, right? Firstly, he's created this DNA scanner. I don't know if anybody else knows he has this technology, because that seems, very, very advanced. I don't know what purpose. I don't know what niche in a market or problem that was created to solve. So someone's developed that. If he created it by accident or whatever, fine. He's created that technology. But what he's actually got himself there is a team of programmers that he's paying in the real world that he could be like, you know what I'm going to do? I've got all their memories, so I've got all their skills. I'm going to put them to work. Like, they can do all my debugging. They can create new code. They can create new extensions of the game. We could do a whole other game. I could extend this. Like, you've just doubled your workforce for no charge. Like,
right.
tell
your times your workforce.
Yeah, exactly. Tell your CEO, because I think that's where your real, that's where your genius comes in, where that he'll be like, yeah, you can, do what you want. You've just created a way of, reducing our overheads whilst increasing our productivity.
Yeah, like the disclosure that you sign when you join the company, that like you give up control over your likeness and that's those lines in the contract that let them reproduce you virtually. That's what's important. You have one day on the job and they're like, right, well, we have you forever. We just have 100 of you and we don't have to pay them. We just have to pay in server time. So good luck with your unemployment. You're fired on day one. Yeah,
I mean,
exactly right.
This is literally what the writers and actors are striking about at the moment. So it's kind of prescient, but it's true though. Like, he's already done it, and I think what I find that's kind of frustrating is the fact he never. I know it's about playing this role and doing this thing, but one of the things he never does, like it's. This is going back to this idea of morality and thing, like and let's say daily state of mind. it's not, because if he wanted to, he could replicate them and then reprogram them to be that character. Like, I want something that's Spock-like. I want something that's McCoy-like or whatever, right? But still
You'd
that
think so.
person, but like, reprogram them, change some of their personality, whatever. But it's not. It's about humiliating and breaking that person. They are a proxy for the person in the real world, and that's sort of the point. So it's about that process of breaking someone. They're breaking their spirit, sort of thing, in inverted commas. So that's the sort of the point, is it? That's what the episode's trying to make, is that thing. Although, yes, they are code, they're not real, but they are acting as a proxy for those people in the real world. So you do have their sort of like duplicate. But like you say, it just feels frustrating when I'm like, well, this feels like a real misuse of technology and resource, especially when you're trying to build a business. So yeah, it's all a little bit ridiculous.
Well, I mean, that's 100% true, and you're obviously completely correct. But isn't this a problem in much of science fiction and in Black Mirror in particular, right?
Mhm.
Like, the heart of this episode is a Star Trek parody that is taking the piss out of Daly and, what a cruel person he really is, and how we kind of find out who we really are in these game simulations, right? And this basic dynamic of being shy with his coworkers, but really wanting, this sort of tyrannical power, right? And that all works fantastically well. But as you say, like, it's introducing all these technologies that have vast implications,
Yeah.
that are not explored. And it doesn't really follow through on its central premise of these are, in fact, not the people. The morality is not normal in the game. Just because you can shoot it like a movie doesn't mean those are people. Yeah, and so it's that usual sort of Black Mirror thing of, like, it focuses on what it wants to do. It does that incredibly well in this episode, just like a 9 or 10 out of 10, easy for me. But you've got to bracket all the stuff that it's not exploring, that doesn't really make any sense. And what bothered me, and I love your point about just, your coding team is just on your machine. It's quite brilliant. But what bothered me was, this actually isn't that bad of a deal for these crew members.
Yeah.
So, first of all, why do you keep them running when you're not playing the game, right? Except to allow them to conspire against you. But basically, they're drinking, they're sitting around, they're trying to, Walton is banging his head into a console for entertainment at one point. And that's kind of like a ha-ha, right? But again, I keep saying, let me sit on the beach and write novels, right?
Yeah.
Like, that sounds great. You mean to tell me that they don't have to sleep? That's established by dialogue. So you mean to tell me that we have, like, roughly 20 hours out of a 24-hour day? We no longer have to sleep. We can experience the sensation of food, but never get fat. We don't have to poop anymore. We don't have to, I miss taking a shit. Okay, well, I guess if that's your biggest complaint in life,
Yeah.
you're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
So, okay, they can't have sex, but, dude, like, make some art. Like, there's find out, just be like, look, all right, let me be crystal clear, Robert Daly. I will play your role to the nines. I will sing He's a Jolly Good Fellow a million times every single day for a couple hours. Yet, just make sure that I have access to, like, the complete works of Shakespeare and of all of the books in history in this simulation, and that I have, can write on the computer and it's not deleted. Like, okay, or I could watch the full library that you have available to. It seems Robert Daly would probably be amenable to that.
Well, that's the thing. I think this is the thing. Again, like, following that first amount of resistance, you're right. I 100%. I didn't realize now you make, because it's all just a server. You can feed any information into it in some way. Yeah, you just go right, because obviously it's just code. Really, it's a bunch of code. It's not actually, it's represented by people when he enters it in his virtual reality. But yeah, they could just say, like you say, back off and go, look, I'm kind of tired of being beaten up. I have my face removed repeatedly. So, do you know what? You're right. Can I have a Kindle that's fully loaded with all these books? If I give you a list, can I just have all these books and I'm going to read this? Or can you just actually give us the screen when you're not here? Can you plug it into Netflix? And we'll just watch that, and we can watch all the previous episodes of Black Mirror. Like, like you're right. Just go, all right, let's entertain us. You've left us here as sentient, Like it does feel like it's trying to suggest that they have no power in this. There's no sort of like, again, I think it's, I don't know if it's trying to make a comment on worker, manager or boss kind of like dynamics, but you just simply say, yes, fine, we're happy to do this. Can we just have this and this to entertain us whilst you're not here? And then when you arrive, we're all on board. We're fine. Just carry on. At least entertain us. Like you say, I'm pretty sure he'd be like, yeah, fine.
Yeah, right. He doesn't seem to care what well, this is another thing. Can't he see in the code what they're doing? Right?
Yeah, like the Matrix.
Right. Like, can't he, can he get a transcript of what they're talking about? It's like, oh, right, they're talking shit about me again.
Yeah.
They're plotting again. Couldn't he get that information if he wanted? If he has the technology to replicate somebody's brain in the machine, surely you'd have a protocol like that. And not to be sort of like, let's take over the episode and make it about something else. Because again, clearly it's about this central dynamic. But if what he wanted to was to get with the new Nanette, right, steal her coffee cup, and there's that HBO series Rehearsal, right? Just rehearse. He's got a copy of her brain, right? Rehearse that conversation, rehearse that dinner over and over again every night. I mean, he could do that. Now, again, I don't need. It's wrong to take over the episode and try to make it about something else and make that character make different decisions. But it wouldn't be bad to have the show know that he can do that. Yeah. And have some line of dialogue or, him try that and realize, that takes time and that takes effort. And I don't really care about getting the girl. I care about having this power as Captain Kirk.
And I think that's the thing
what I really want.
Yeah, and that's what it's got to show. Like you say, like it could even reinforce that point and actually make him more of a villain in that they've said they have asked for entertainment. Yeah, we did ask for all this stuff, but he's just never listened. Like he's not bothered. Or even one of them say, like, have one of the guys that is a programmer, because we know that one of them is from his programming team, say, well, with this technology, he could easily be doing this, this, and this. But he chooses not to. Like, the people are there with the knowledge to tell you these things. But again, it like you say, it's focusing on that one thing. It wants that sort of like power dynamic. Let's get to the end. Let's get to the solution. So there's a rebellion, and sort of so they come up with a plan. They're going to delete themselves. What they find is they've got to get so they're not rebooted. They've got to get someone in the real world to break into his house to destroy the file with all the the DNA bits.
Not the file, the actual physical objects with DNA that he keeps in a fridge in his house.
Yeah, which he could just get new objects. Yeah, but he could also replace all of those within a week, so it means nothing.
True, and also one of the things that I find most annoying is there's this update to the game in the real world that's going on, and the way it appears in the Infinity world that in his private build is as a wormhole in the distance that they realize if they fly into the update, they'll be purged because the update will remove
unrecognized code.
Weird unrecognized code. Except,
can I just say firstly, that's not how environments work.
Exactly. Right.
So it would be in a completely sort of sectioned off or a completely separate environment where the update would be going through to production and all this other stuff.
When you're playing like Grand Theft Auto Online and an update is processing, it's not like the skies turn like Crisis on Infinite Earths red for a week,
Yeah.
and the programmers are like, we don't know why this is happening. It's the code interpreting our update.
Yeah. I hate these kind of things in games where they'll say, like, you say, there's an update coming and stuff, and all of a sudden things start to shake and things happen. You're just like, no, that's not how this works. Like, this is ridiculous. It drives me mad. So yes, it's represented by a wormhole, and they think they're going to be deleted, but they are not deleted. They are just passed into the production game, the live version online. But this is you said that he's not the villain. They, in doing so, trap him in like a comatose state. He's unable to leave the game. So he's trapped in it, like almost like a comatose state in the real world, trapped in a shuttle in his in his game. And he goes after him, like he flies after them, and he's all pissed off and he's angry. He's, I'm going to do so many horrible things to you. And again, we know he could, because he could go. At that point, he could go, stop, out game, come out the game.
Yeah.
And then be like, okay, well, I'm going to go in the office and sort this out by just typing some stuff in. Like, it's this complete misunderstanding of, oh, we've got to be in the game to do these things. No, if he comes out the game, he's got probably more power by coming out the game, going to the office and plugging into the server. And so it's like, this all makes no sense.
Well, this is true, but it also says that within the game he has those godlike powers, but only if he's on the ship. Now, that's possible. You could build that into your private game environment, but clearly he's designed the shuttlecraft, right? Like, so that's part of his private game environment. Why does he, why can't he just, as you said, he could pop out of the game and just say, right, bring the ship closer, move that ship closer.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one variable, right? Presumably. But equally, why can't he within the game, make the ship closer, or alter, or make them all lose their arms so they can't, pilot, even though he's on the shuttlecraft? I don't, there's a lot here that you kind of have to buy, or that doesn't really make sense.
No, this is one of those things. This is one of those episodes, like, there are better episodes we've had, and I'm sure there'll be better ones coming. When they get to the extreme of technology, that I think sort of like, and Charlie Brooker sort of acknowledged that he's not, a technical expert. He's not a, futurist or anything, these kind of things. But the fact is, like, you should have more knowledge. You should have at least a consultant that's coming and going, like, this is what would happen. Because the point of the Black Mirror is about the misuse, the dystopian use of technology. How technology could be mishandled, and it can do this in a sci-fi entertaining way. But this is good. This is one of these episodes that's moved almost from technological to sort of like magical realism. This is like that level of like the Matrix, where they're like, we can, wow, I know kung fu. Like, you can just learn stuff, and you're like, cool. So it's a sci-fi fantasy film at this point. Like, you're leaning into the, I don't know, sort of like the social commentary or the social satire or whatever, but you kind of lose that as well because of all the things you've done, and the ending becoming such a sort of magical realism kind of sort of thing of these sentient entities are now off in the live game.
Yeah, I mean, the whole climax here is a problem, with the wormhole and why, how do they survive it after all? And then they're interacting with players. Well, the machine's going to get turned off, right? I mean, somebody's going to come and find a brain dead Robert Daly at the house and, turn off this private build, and then they're all dead anyway. It kind of wants it to be, sort of like a pilot ending where they fly off and, they're off to do adventures together. Well, not for very long. Well, the other thing is then Walton has to fix the ship, and he said that he's going to burn, but he won't die because they can't sort of die in the game for some reason. And then he never returns at the end. So I guess he's still burning in there. Like, if you turn off the engine and they're all fine with it for a second. Yeah. Like, that doesn't make sense. But to get back to this morality, right? So, like, my argument is actually Walton isn't doing anything immoral. He's torturing lines of code. He's torturing representatives of people. He's stolen their DNA. But, I mean, outside of breaking some law about representations, right? Or, some law like that that's really like a privacy, law. He really hasn't done anything ethically wrong here. But they have. So keep in mind, they've basically killed Daly. They've, in the real world, an actual person. They've made him brain dead, basically. They've ordered a pizza, that they didn't pay for. But also, they have blackmailed the real Nanette and made her commit breaking and entering and theft. So like the real Nanette is now guilty of serious crimes that are presumably going to be investigated, that they have committed blackmail. Now I understand it doesn't feel that way because we identify them as characters, as people, but in fact,
that's not, exactly what's happened. Well, let's play this out. He doesn't make it in the real world, right? For whatever purpose, he's in this thing. He's brain dead, or he dies of starvation, or whatever. He's not found for several days. Doesn't turn up at work. Because again, here's the irony of it, right? He doesn't turn up for work. He dies. He's the technical expert that understands all the stuff. Well, all right, you're risking the game being shut off then anyway. So you're you're going to be killed anyway. But also, I would suggest that someone like Daly in his house, if he's going to be this kind of technical expert and technical, and highly known, I'm pretty sure he's going to have cameras around his property. So when he dies in some weird circumstance with his technology and they check out those videos and find Nanette wandering his property, she's going to be a suspect in that as well. So it's all, it's all a bit.
Yeah, she's left her DNA, her fingerprints
all over the place.
And then when the police raid her house and find all the DNA stuff, I mean, who knows? I mean, morally, I think it's interesting because we're obviously supposed to think Daly is this incel monster. But, we are not far in the real world from somebody going out on a date and basically thinking this person is, cold, this girl, let's gender it, right? This woman is, sort of stuck up, not interested in me, it's not clicking, going home, taking her photos, replicating her likeness in a simulated environment and raping and killing. And that will be, according to our current ethics, and, we don't regard that as a life, that will be completely ethically correct. And we might even say, that might be therapeutic, especially if he's considering crimes in the real world or feels that kind of motivation. Now, that's ugly. That's hard for us to deal with, to watch. Okay? Yeah. This show makes us watch it and then says it's bad. And we're supposed to feel, well, it's not. But
I mean, let's think about it. This is NPCs. It's because of the sentience. It's because they are not a non-playable character. He's given them sentience in some way. That's the whole the crux of it, isn't it? Which is the part that people would struggle with. But again, if you've got problems with people being killed off and sort of thing, that could be can be rebooted, could be respawned and stuff from the same thing. Go play, what's the war game? Code of Call of Duty, something of, where like people are bombing and shooting and blowing the crap out of each other. Tell them, like, how is that any different? That's a male power fantasy, or or any sort of power fantasy. Is people logging into that, racking up the biggest guns and explosives they can get their hands on, and then just going and shooting the shit out of each other like that. There's non-playable characters in that you're blowing the stuff out of, and or go play, what was it? I don't know if you've ever played like the Hitman games, where the entire point of the game is to go and kill someone and then do it quietly or discreetly or not, depending on how you want to play the game. Like that. Yeah. This is one of those episodes, and this is why I do find this episode kind of frustrating, because it wants to have its cake and eat it. And it's the highest. I think it's the highest. I'm just going to double check. I think it's the highest rated. Oh no, there's one of the coming, but this is a really high rated episode at 8.3 on IMDb. And it is one of those things where I'm just like, yeah, it looks great. Like I said, the production values in this are great. The cast are really good. Like, I enjoy the cast. They all do the bits they're supposed to do really well. Parts of this, I enjoy. There were certain scenes, like the whole scene when they're on the planet and he gets, like I say, the pizza arrives and they have to stop and they're all stood around just like discussing stuff. And that's
brilliant. That's up there with like the best Galaxy Quest moments.
Exactly.
Right?
Like, it's hilarious. Like, it's really, really well done.
And they're checking in with the monster, and they're like, "How you doing in there?"
Yeah, and the villain,
and
the villain's like, "This gun's heavy. Like, I'm really tired of carrying this around." Like, it's all there's some scenes in this that are really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
But then you sort of go, "Oh, but this is the commentary that it's trying to make," and you go, "Yeah, but the commentary doesn't really work." So it's sort of like, it's not as clever as it thinks it is, but it's fun, and that's the thing. Like, if I took this as a blockbuster and go, "That's the thing," right? Fine, it's fine. It works on that level. This is a fun, kind of silly episode, but I can't take it serious as sort of like a satire, like where some of the others, I'll say, are actually a really successful satire, or make me feel uncomfortable for the right reasons, or those sorts of things.
Well, to me, I disagree with you, because I think everything you're saying is correct. But I take this as a satire of Star Trek and of genre fiction, right? Sci-fi genre stuff. And taken at that level, those plot problems are not as big of a deal, right? Like, taken as a serious sci-fi entry unto itself, right? It fails these key tests. But taken as a parody or as a satire of these fictions, including Black Mirror itself, potentially, and of what, we often have these discussions about, like, what is being sold to us when we're going to see Iron Man or Guardians of the Galaxy or Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? I mean, we're sold on the action. We're sold on, the too often people identify as the white male protagonist who's, gonna solve. There's nothing I can't shoot. There's no problem I can't solve with these here fists. And then getting the girl and all of this, and we're aware of the potential toxicity of those tropes. This is really brutally exposing those at the heart of something like Star Trek, right? Which is the most innocent, not Arnold Schwarzenegger franchise. Can't imagine it. And even the sort of Federation Creed, we see Daly, lecturing them about it as he presides as a tyrant. And I think all of that. So to me, taken as a sort of satire of the genre, and especially of Star Trek, this is brilliant and just works fantastically well. Even the problems with the climax, I think, are typical of sci-fi climaxes.
Yeah, I'll accept that.
I'm willing to kind of, like, it works better than most, and I'm willing to, I'm not groaning in pain. So I sort of see it as a very loving satire, loving but vicious satire of sci-fi, and especially Star Trek, and taken that way rather than as a serious, brilliant entry into it as its own sci-fi entry. I see it. I would rate it very high.
Okay, I can see what you're saying. I can see what you're saying from a, like I say, it's a poking fun. It's a parody of those, space traveling, sort of like the Buccaneer captain kind of tropes that we've seen since Kirk and before, I suppose. Like, I'd even say like Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, all those kind of sort of characters. So I can see that element, and that the idea of the fantasy and that sort of thing. And there are some good bits that really do nail that. And this idea of sort of, it's my ship and, you're my crew. That's sort of the idea of the possession of it. So I can see that. It does definitely work on those levels. I think, So I think I am hindered, though, by the bits in the real world. Because, again, like you said, that's what it works as. But it clearly wants to give you this message of, this other thing of like, oh, he's clearly evil because he treats these pixels terribly. And so, I don't know. It's sort of, That's where I sort of it loses me a bit, not a bit, quite a bit. So yeah. Anyway, we've sort of run to time, so let's go.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts then on the USS Callister?
I love this episode. I still unabashedly love this episode. It looks great. Most of that stuff works. It is filled with plot holes. I mean, it really is filled with plot holes. But again, for me, it's sort of satire, and we could poke more fun. And it is a mean-spirited Star Trek satire that still manages to be funny and charming. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. They've talked about turning this into a spin-off series, by the way. Boy, if you have those problems, just you wait until USS Callister is the next Netflix series.
Yeah, we'll see. It won't be the next Red Dwarf. Okay, yeah, I feel very much the same. I think we've said everything. Anyway, so that's it, ladies and gentlemen. If you have got thoughts on this episode, am I right? Is Julian right? Do you completely disagree with us? Is this a masterpiece, or is it a piece of space garbage? Let us know and reach out on @PodTimeSpace, or come and find us on our Patreon, www.patreon.com/20CG Media, and loads of stuff on there. More sort of things about Twilight Zone, as we said. We're sort of really working through the Twilight Zone, and lots of other bits and pieces as well. And obviously, just leave us a review if you like what we're doing. Reviews help, and we appreciate all the feedback we get. So please, just take those few minutes to leave a review. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, for now, thank you very much. Thank you, Julian, and we shall see you on the next episode.